Welcome to the AI+HI Project. I'm Nichol Bradford, SHRM's Executive in Residence for AI+HI. Thanks for joining us. Each week, we sit down with visionaries from the worlds of business, tech, and HR to provide you with deep insights, actionable strategies, and practical advice for harnessing the transformative potential of AI combined with human ingenuity. This week, we're discussing how to cultivate cultures of growth and leverage mindset science for organizational success with AI. Our guest this week is Mary Murphy, founder and CEO of Equity Accelerator and author of Cultures of Growth. Welcome to the AI+HI Project, Mary.
Thank you, Nicole. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
I've been so excited to talk to you because I believe that your work around growth cultures is essential for AI success in organizations. For our audience who may not have read your book or heard about your work, could you describe what a growth culture is so everyone can get on the same page?
Absolutely. So I talk about how we have, in many ways, misunderstood this fixed and growth mindset idea that came from my mentor, Carol Dweck, originally, and has been studied really for about 30 years. We always think about mindset as something that exists in your mind, right? Nicole, what's your mindset? How does it affect you? What's my mindset? How does it affect me? And what we've discovered in the last 15 years or so in our research is that mindset is actually a cultural feature. And so I make a distinction between these fixed minded cultures of genius that really focus on you either have it or you don't. It focuses on finding those star performers, believing that these are the people who have some kind of inherent, bigger, better capabilities, talents, smarts, right? And due to their intelligence and their abilities, we're going to make the entire team, the whole organization focused around these geniuses, right? That's the fixed minded culture of genius. And I contrast that with the growth minded culture of growth. And that really has that growth mindset belief that everybody has potential, regardless of where their talent, ability levels are in any given moment, that regardless of where they are, they can always improve and grow with the right support, seeking help when they're stuck, and that everyone has the potential to contribute and develop over time. And what we know about these cultures is that most organizations, especially those we've worked with, at Equity Accelerator and in many other contexts, we have seen in our research that most cultures are going to be some kind of mixture of the two. There's going to be pockets of cultures of growth and pockets of cultures of genius in almost every organization. And the key is understanding what those mindset cultures are and how they have impact for people's motivation, performance, and ability to grow.
So what influenced you to study this? What in your background made you want to solve or explore this particular problem?
Yeah, well, I am bicultural. My mom's family comes from Mexico. My dad's family is white here in the United States. And I really, from a very young age, started to notice these cultural differences and how being in one culture or another culture, you really change the way people see you and interact with you, but also the way you yourself behave. And so, from a very young age, I was interested in these different contexts and environmental differences and notice them. And then when I went to graduate school, I went to graduate school at Stanford and I studied with Carol Dweck and also Claude Steele, who came up with the idea of stereotype threat and identity threat. And that's been studied in many educational workplace contexts. And that's also a theory of context. There are some places where we know we are more valued and respected based on our identities than others. And so understanding how to cultivate these environments that really support people's motivation, engagement, performance has always been really central to me, I think from my personal upbringing and then all the way through my studies in graduate school. And I came to the idea of a culture, mindset culture, cultures of genius and cultures of growth from an experience I had when I was in graduate school. I was sitting in a seminar. Every year, all the PhD students have to present their research to the research faculty. And I was supporting a friend of mine there. And all of a sudden, in the middle of his talk, there was a faculty member on the right hand side who just shouted out, didn't raise his hand, of course, just shouted out, well, it's clear the fatal flaw in all of this work is XYZ. And he goes on about this. And we all look at him in horror as he's like, saying this. And um, from the other side of the room, another faculty member shouts out, no, it's not. The problem isn't XYZ. The problem is ABC. And suddenly they're fighting amongst each other. Who's the smartest in the room? Which of these faculty members has the best idea and can take down the student with the most cutting, way of speaking about it, the fatal flaw? And I thought a lot about this, and it felt very fixed minded. Carol Dweck had just arrived to Stanford in these days. And I thought, this feels like a cultural feature. It's like the way this environment is set up, that they're proving and performing who's the smartest in the room. How can we take down other people and their ideas and show that we're the smart ones and not others? And a few days later, I was in a different seminar series, and the faculty had a totally different way of interacting with the talks. I think we've all been in like business meetings and organizational settings where this is the case, where it was clear that the faculty were still trying to find the problems and the issues with the students' work, but they were, instead of competing to see who was the smartest, they were competing to see which of them could source the best ideas to move the project forward, to actually make it have an impact. So it was this culture of learning and development. Sure, we're going to find the issues, but they're going to have 5 or 6 or 7 different solutions during that presentation time that the students could then leave motivated, engaged, and know what the right strategies were in order to do the work next. And so I took these understandings, these 2 different ways of motivating people. One, prove and perform, show me how smart you are. One, learning and growth and development is something we're going to do together, to Carol. And I said, Carol, I know people have been thinking about the fixed and growth mindset as a quality just inside our minds, but is it possible that it's also this cultural feature? And if so, what is the consequence of living in a fixed or growth mindset culture for the people's ideas, for their innovation, for their collaboration, for their performance? And she said, Mayor, no one has ever thought about mindset in this way, but we should do it together. And that was about 15 years ago. And so we have since been studying how these mindset cultures develop and what the consequences of them are for people.
Mhm. Yeah, it makes so much sense too. And so what I'm hearing is that you were on campus, you were watching these 2 seminars and just really the contrast between them,
Yes,
and the contrast between the seminars and then what the battles were,
that's right.
how what the battles were in those rooms made it really clear that when we have a fixed mindset, we're not, no man is an island. We're not amongst ourselves. We are always in context.
Yeah.
And so the context can be fixed or it can be growth oriented. And I remember reading about how your conversation with Carol went
Mhm.
when you walked in and you said, "Hey," and she said, "No one's thought about that."
Yeah.
And so I
And thank
really,
goodness she responded from her growth mindset instead of her fixed mindset. She'd be like, no, Mayor, there's nothing to this.
yeah, yeah. Well, and thank goodness that you've been working on it for the
Yeah.
last 15 years, right to the moment where we really need it the most, because I think probably one of the most successful examples of what happens, or the most known example of what happens when you change from a fixed mindset
Mm.
to a growth, or a fixed culture to a growth culture, is the transformation of Microsoft.
Oh, yeah.
Like that's been really amazing. So your book focuses on organizational mindset. Can you explain what this concept means and why it's crucial for modern workplaces?
That's right. Well, we have discovered that anytime there's 2 or more people together, there's a mindset culture between them because, especially in the Western world, we really focus on talent, intelligence, ability. And every organization wants people who are highly talented, highly capable, right? Competent individuals. The question then becomes, do you want those people who are smart, talented, and capable? Do you want them to have a fixed mindset view about their abilities where they really feel like they become fragile in the moment when they're asked to do something new, when they say, this is my strength and only my strength. And so I'm only going to do the things in my strengths bucket, which is part of my problem with strengths finders in a lot of ways. That we set up an environment, a team, an organization, divisions within those organizations that really inculcate these ideas? Or are we wanting highly capable, highly talented people who yet still have a growth mindset about those high capabilities that they bring to the workplace, that they believe that regardless of where they are, even if they're at the high end of the distribution, that there's still room to grow and improve. And they can learn from the distance that they've traveled in order to bring that to the organization. So then the question becomes, how does the organization actually create a mindset culture and foster an organizational mindset that moves people to their growth mindset more of the time, right? And how that is done is often through practices, policies, interactions, looking at the norms on the ground. There's this argument in organizational behavior about what is culture really? Is culture our values and our mission statement? Or is culture really how we experience our day to day interactions with our peers, with our supervisors in the organization itself? And I come pretty strongly down on the side of the norms piece because we know, even in this idea of mindset culture, as I said, there's the big C mindset culture that's often set by executives and leadership teams, CEOs that create the sort of dominant culture. And they are going to set policies and practices that do affect all of the team, right? All the way through the organization. But when it comes down to people's daily experiences of the organization, their microcultures become really important. Their team, their relationship with their supervisor, their relationship with their peers. And so there are these microcultures of growth and genius that we could be focused on. And all of those constitute the organization's mindset. So it's why on my book, I had these concentric circles, right? Because we are surrounded in we have our own individual mindsets. And then we have the mindset that we get from our families and our communities, and then the ones from our organizations and our teams. As we grow out and out and out, we're surrounded by these mindset cultures. And so when it comes to organizational mindset, it's really thinking through what are the policies, the practices, the leadership messages, the norms that we have in place on the ground that are shifting people, maybe even unknowingly, either towards their fixed mindset or to their growth.
Mhm. Yeah, it's sort of like, how does the organization prime employees to be fixed or growth oriented? How do teams, how do managers, what are all the little nudges that we might not be paying attention to that set it one way or the other? So we like to give people very tangible examples so they can sort of, you know, um, bite into it. Can you share an example of of an organization where mindset science has been used?
Yeah. So, I like to point people to several different organizations. You mentioned Microsoft. Microsoft is kind of the canonical growth mindset company. When Satya Nadella read Carol's book and said, I wonder if this could be applied outside the mind into organizations, and said, we're going to declare Microsoft the first growth minded company. And then they worked in the people and talent office to really think about how to put this into practice with their evaluations of people, the way that they recruit people, promote people within the organization. And also in terms of the strategy, what are the ways in which they can set up learning experiments and opportunities within the organization so that they could get the best ideas on the ground? So that one is pretty well known. I would say another that I like to point to is Patagonia. Patagonia really brought with it the head of their HR, their Dean Carter, really focused on this question of using the metaphor and the ideas around sustainable agriculture and thinking about how that applies in the HR context. So, thinking a lot about, for example, how in many ways, when we plant fields and then we harvest that crop, oftentimes that's an extractive process. And we have to be thinking a lot about in organizations, what are we extracting from people and what are we putting back in, right? In order to maintain that soil, maintain the organization itself, how can we think about the evaluation practices, the promotion practices, the recruitment practices that are really going to be putting back into individuals instead of just extracting what we want out of them. Because we know from their changes practices and from many other organizations that have tried these cultures of growth practices, we have seen that there's greater commitment on the part of the individuals inside these organizations, organizational commitment, organizational trust, satisfaction. You get much less of this turnover that we have seen so often post pandemic of people sort of turning over and moving from organization to organization. And people are more satisfied. they also come up with better ideas in terms of innovation and creativity, and they're more collaborative with each other. They don't feel threatened because they're not in situations and organizations that have policies like stack ranking, right? This old policy that's actually making quite a comeback in the tech sector right now, where we just line up individuals, we fire the bottom 10%, 15%, 20% on each evaluative period, and then we do it again. What does that do to people? It's a very fixed minded message, right? You either have it or you don't. And if you're in that bottom percent, everyone has the potential to get into that bottom percent over time. And so, what we want to do is make sure that we are besting others in our group, in our division, so that we find ourselves not in that bottom percent. And so that sets us up to not be collaborators, but competitors with each other. And it means that we see that a lot of people will hold back their best ideas because they don't want to lose their status or their reputation. And so that's how the culture of genius really undermines all of the organizational goals and success and people's own experiences inside these companies.
I really want to get into growth cultures and AI implementations.
Yes.
And the Microsoft case is an example of that. And I had friends who were at Microsoft before and after,
Yes.
and the cultural difference, is astounding the way that they describe it. And so one of the things that we've seen is that for successful AI implementations, and this was true under machine learning and predictive, and also it appears also to be true for generative AI as well, is that for successful implementations, it's like data and technology, those are table stakes. You have to have them. But 70%, and BCG actually warns all its clients, 70% of success is people, processes, and ways of working, i.e. culture. So, for that part, and specifically, for example, with Microsoft, with their internal implementation, where they were dog fooding Copilot and bringing it on inside the organization, they one really leveraged HR, because HR is the circulatory system of any organization, and two, they really had these communities of practice, and so lots of collaboration. So I'm sure you've been talking to many clients now that AI is coming into really coming to its height. Could you share a little bit about how you feel that the growth culture mindset is supportive of change, and specifically change with AI?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So your audience is going to be familiar with Peter Drucker's quote, probably, right? Culture eats strategy for lunch. And I do think that culture is one of the most important things when it comes to any kind of transformation or technological change that is happening. And we need to get our people together in order to learn it and to figure out how to use it best for the organization's outcomes and goals, right? And so when Peter says culture eats strategy for lunch, I think that's important. But I also think it's a particular kind of culture. It's that growth mindset culture. And why is it? Well, when it comes to, if we're thinking about AI technology, for example, that is what I like to think about as a general technology. And that general technology, it's only useful when we find the appropriate use cases that is going to be important locally inside an organization. And so, how do you do that? It's going to be people who have to discover those use cases for their own work and for the work of their teams and their organizations. So, it's going to be essential to get people motivated to be able to, in some ways, play in the space, right? Experiment a little bit, make some mistakes, because initially, when you're working with this technology, there are going to be mistakes, and be resilient enough and create learning systems so that we can learn from those early mistakes that are being made. And that learning can be transmitted across the organization. So more people are learning at scale and those mistakes aren't repeated. And that's how you go faster, together in that shared learning. And it's why the community of practice is so important with this as well, where, mindset culture and mindset is not something you do alone. It is something that you really can be done together and should be done together. So, thinking about these cultures of growth pods that can be created as you're experimenting with new technologies and bringing them into different teams, different parts of the organization finding ways to be sure we're learning from mistakes and failures along the way, and also the successes that we're having and being able to share that broadly with the organization. That helps everyone go further faster.
So, for leaders who are adopting and implementing AI, and they also want people to be in their growth mindset, how do they communicate these principles to their teams while they're in the thick of it?
Yeah. So I think the first thing, especially for leaders and managers, is know thyself. So I talk in the book about, and on the book's website, there is an assessment that we've actually used in published research on people's mindset triggers. So understanding your own as a leader and manager, when do you likely see yourself moving to your fixed mindset versus your growth mindset? And there's 4 of these triggers, these evaluative situations where we're asking people to do something that we know other people are going to evaluate, presentation, a report, a client facing, product. There's high effort situations when I'm having to try new things like AI technology, never had to do it before. I don't know exactly where to start. I'm going to make some mistakes. That often triggers people to their fixed mindset. Critical feedback, when they actually get that that failure feedback, or they see that they're making mistakes, that's a place. And then the success of others. When others are really getting this quickly and are really making big strides in their use of this technology in their work, and they're being praised for it, how does it make everyone else feel? So, as leaders and managers, we set up these situations. So, it's important for us to know our own mindset triggers, but it's also important to know the mindset triggers of your team and those individuals you work with. So, for example, if I'm going to praise someone because they really use this AI technology in order to meet this goal, this KR that we had for the organization, let's say. And so they did great. We want to hold them up. We want to praise them. That's important. Usually, what do we do when we praise someone, Nicole? We usually say, what? Good job, right? Like, way to
Yeah.
go. And, that's great. It helps people feel good. It helps people feel seen and valued, but it doesn't really tell them or the rest of the team, what did they do well specifically? What was the piece of this that actually moved the organization forward? Or what did they learn along the way? What were the mistakes that they had to overcome in order to have this success? And so, what we want to do, even when we're praising individuals, right? We can be praising people, helping them feel great about it, but also creating a learning moment for that individual so they know what they want to repeat and what success they want to build on specifically. But also it sets up that learning for the rest of the team who's listening and doesn't put them straight into their fixed mindset. Oh, wow, if Bob is so great at this, he, I guess, is going to be the AI expert on the team, and the rest of us will just have to rely on him. I don't know. And so it doesn't really motivate people to actually do those strategies and try that new behavior that we know will have good outcomes for the organization. So I would say
Yeah.
know your mindset triggers, know the triggers of those that you interact with and lead, and then set up those situations in such a way that are really going to help people move toward growth more of the time.
Yes, one of the things about AI is that it is electricity. Like it is, everyone's going to have to learn. And so I feel like the ability for leaders to understand how to establish a growth mindset culture is it's completely aligned with what organizations have to have. A little while ago, you mentioned performance management
Yeah.
and how that changes. And of course, our audience is an HR audience. So, could you discuss how growth mindset principles can be integrated into performance management and the feedback process itself? You mentioned sort of like a case by case a moment ago, but just in the entire performance management system.
Yeah. So a culture of growth, a true growth mindset culture, is going to have a lot of feedback. It's going to be a culture of feedback, regular feedback. It's not just quarterly or a couple times a year. A growth mindset culture really has that at its base because in order to learn, grow, and develop, you have to know what's working. So, what to double down on and what to improve even further, and what's not working. And so that performance management system is really important for that. And there are ways in which you can look at the metrics by which we are looking at people's performance, whether or not they're getting credit for example, building and growing others and themselves in the organization. what are some of the risks that they have been taking with regards to their work? What are the stretches that they have been engaging in? What have they been learning from their mistakes? I like the question, what's your favorite mistake that our team or you have made in the last quarter? What did you learn from it? And how has that actually helped supported you as you've moved forward, right? The favorite mistakes practice. I also think for performance management, we need to be looking not just at outcomes, but also process. And so building in ways in order to look at the process by which we had these successes or these failures or these mistakes that have happened, and really understanding those processes and sharing those processes. Because a lot of times when we just focus on outcome, did you do the thing? Did you not do the thing in our performance management? It kind of covers up any real learning, right? We don't have any opportunity to learn what had to be in place in order to have that outcome or that success. And so that's one of the places I've seen in other organizations like Microsoft and others. They even ask for who did you grow and develop in the course of this last performance period, and who helped support you in your growth and development. And then you can create these network models and you can understand who are your real culture creators within the organization that are really building these cultures of growth in their support of others, figure out their practices and help share them across the organization. This is how you kind of build that culture of growth together. And you can use some of the data being collected in the performance evaluation system in order to identify those nodes in the network.
That actually raises an interesting question. Um, so, as a manager or a leader, let's say I have a team and I want them all to be open and interested in adopting AI, and I'm setting up performance metrics for it. What is the fixed way to do that, and what is the growth way to do that? I imagine the fixed way to do it would be like, did you do it or did you not do it? And you didn't take this class, or you took the class, but I don't see you using it. And the growth would be, did I use it?
What did you learn? Where were you challenged by it? What kind of mistakes were really helpful for you along the way as you were trying to figure out how to use this and find the right test case or the case for the use of it in your own work? I also think that asking people about when they reached out for help, like what are the other ways in which they went beyond, say, example, the class that they were required to take in order to learn how to use this technology in their own context. But where are the other resources and supports that you sought out when you got stuck? That really shows that next level of motivation and engagement. Oh, I went and talked to someone who I know, used it for this other case and I learned from them. Figuring out ways to network people together in order to have these supportive communities while they're trying to learn this, that's kind of the growth way of implementing some of these change practices. And it's really important, we've written about this, to not create what we call these false growth mindset contexts, where we just kind of throw people into the deep end, and we sort of say, okay, we're going to give you these courses, and then we just expect you to do it. You have to be sure that people have the tools, the resources, and the ongoing supports that they need in order to achieve what's been asked of them, in order for them to really be able to learn deeply and to be applying and experimenting with this new technology in their own context, and to be rewarded for that kind of behavior, for the persistence in their learning over time. And so we don't want to just sort of say, we all have a growth mindset around here. Now take this class, right? Everybody's going to take this class and learn. We need to provide those ongoing supports and communities and ways so that that learning can be really deeply implemented. And people can even figure out new and innovative ways that maybe weren't taught in the course because they have the space to experiment with it in their own context. And that's where having those learning structures are really important, because when someone does have a really innovative way or use case that they've discovered, that they have a way to share it. And so that that can then be shared broadly and everybody has the benefit of that learning and not just the individual. So that's where I think like that networked learning approach becomes really important, and the supports and resources there too.
That's great because everyone in our audience is grappling with this right now. And so we talked about what it means for individual performance management.
Mhm.
As an organization, on an organizational level, how do you measure whether or not you have been successful with uh, implementing or creating a growth culture in your organization? How do you know? How do we know?
Yeah. Well, we have done a couple of different things. One way is using organizations. Usually, many organizations will have things like pulse surveys, right? Taking the pulse of the body of workers over time, and so we can put in some questions in that pulse survey around what do employees believe is the dominant belief in the organization about talent, intelligence, and ability, and how do they perceive their managers or their leaders as having this fixed or growth mindset view about employees? That's one way to measure people's perception of the mindset culture as it is being embodied in leadership. And we also measure norms on the ground. What are the norms around collaboration versus competition, innovation and risk taking versus playing it safe and repeating the same kind of approaches and strategies that we know have been successful in the past? We don't know if they're going to be successful going forward. They probably need to be amended in some way as they go forward. So, are we playing it safe or are we willing to take a few risks, right? We look at the ways in which employees can tell you what's true on the ground, what's real. Do people really collaborate, or is there a level of competition that's happening between people? And that's where we see the value implementation gaps in that data that can tell us whether or not we need to really focus on different norms specifically in order to cultivate those cultures of growth, or do we need to work on leadership messages, right? Or leadership behavior that is actually creating that value implementation gap. We say we believe this, we say we're a growth minded organization, but on the ground, or when our leader says something, they say, just get the thing done, right? They're only talking about the wins every week. They're not also talking about the struggles or the challenges that we're having and helping to brainstorm among the team how we can solve those challenges, right? They only want to be brought solutions and never problems or processes that they might want to be having. So we ask these questions directly to employees, and you can see looking at it over time when organizations take on these culture change practices, you can see that their perceptions, not only of the mindset culture itself via the leaders and what they're saying and doing, but also on the norms on the ground are improving when we change some of these practices in the setting.
Great. Okay, so one last question. The so one of the things that I believe that AI compatible cultures are growth cultures. I think that that's what, I think that's what we will see down the road, that a growth culture is an AI compatible culture. And for people who want an AI compatible culture, they're going to have to endeavor to become a growth culture. That is just what has to happen. So we like to have the last question be very practical advice. I'm a manager. I have a team. I want to bring in AI. I want a growth culture. What is the first thing that I need to do?
Mm.
What do I do?
The first thing I would say is, well, I'm going to give you two things. The first thing I would say is take the mindset triggers assessment. Understand your mindset triggers and take it from the perspective of your team. What are the mindset triggers you see on that team? Because these mindset triggers are general triggers that can be applied to the use of new technology and new challenges that you're asking people to engage in as they come to work and they engage in these new technologies. So, understanding what those are, and in that assessment you have a lot of very specific, if evaluative situations or high effort situations are their trigger, there are strategies that you can use in order to introduce this technology and to support people's use of it over time that move them to growth instead of fix. The other thing I would do is say take our culture cues audit. If you're a manager and you have a team, what are the subtle cues in your team environment that are signaling that we are more of a culture of genius? We either have it or you don't. Who's the smartest in the room? Who can learn this the fastest, most effortlessly, flawlessly, right? Versus a culture of growth, right? And so understanding what those cues are helps us then identify, okay, these are the cues that we need to be shifting in our own local team environment to create a microculture of growth. Regardless of what the big C culture is of the whole organization, you as a manager have a lot of power to shape the microculture of your team. So understanding the cues that people are using to identify whether we're in a fixed or growth mindset culture become really important, because those are the levers of change that managers can tweak to move towards growth more of the time. And the last thing I'll say to do is do this together. If there's a group of managers, again, that community of practice is really important, where we can say, okay, I'm getting this feedback from my team that the way I do this or the way I do that, I'm getting a lot of critique, a lot of criticism. Trying to process that yourself is likely to move you straight into your fixed mindset. So finding a culture of growth pod of other managers, leaders, maybe inside or outside the organization, that can help you parse the feedback you're receiving so that they can say, okay, here's the learning for you as a leader, and here's what you can apply and use today with your team that helps you yourself move toward growth and change your practices so that you are instilling that micro culture of growth in your local team environment.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you,
And
Nichol.
and that's going to do it for this week's episode. A big thank you to our guests for sharing your deep experiences and insights with us. Before we say goodbye, I encourage everyone to follow the AI+HI Project wherever you enjoy your podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to comment, leave a review. And finally, you can find all of our episodes on the website at shrm.org/AI+HI. Thanks for joining the conversation, and we'll catch you next time.